And now joining us live from Taipei, Taiwan is political analyst Ross Feingold to discuss the ongoing border clashes between Cambodia and Thailand. Ross, thank you so much for joining us here on A News. We have been talking about what is going on for a while about the latest fighting between Southeast Asian neighbors into its second week. How soon should we expect the tensions between Thailand and Cambodia to release?
I think the pressure is going to be enormous on the two countries to bring about a quick end to the latest resumption of clashes. That doesn't mean tensions will disappear. So the most likely outcome in the short term, and an outcome that I hope does happen, is that they at least stop the gunfire. They stop the exchange of fire that's currently occurring in the border and disputed area, and allow normal life as much as possible to begin. Now, to achieve that, both sides are going to have to pull their troops back a certain distance and really respect the agreement that was reached earlier this year, and stick to that. And if they need to allow international monitoring or from ASEAN, that might be one way to try to maintain the peace. So I do think it's possible for a ceasefire to resume, but there's definitely going to be a lot of ill will. The longer this goes on, and if it continues at the current intensity, then it will generate a significant amount of ill will, which will take a long time to dissipate.
Will both sides, as you have mentioned, vow continuous fighting and accuse each other for violating the U.S. brokered truce? So how has the most recent U.S. approach in the region defined the latest round of conflict, in your opinion?
President Trump just wants this to stop. For starters, he looks at it as just disrespectful to him because he was involved both in July as well as more recently in October when he visited Kuala Lumpur and witnessed the signing of an agreement between Cambodia and Thailand. So he does consider it disrespectful. It's a personal affront to him that they're not respecting the agreement that he was involved in facilitating and witnessed. He came all the way to Kuala Lumpur. And that was really one of the main motivations for him to attend that summit. He could have just as easily skipped that summit. Other U.S. presidents have skipped it in recent years. But one of the significant factors for him to personally attend that summit in Kuala Lumpur was to witness the signing of an agreement between Cambodia and Thailand. So that will be a significant factor here as well. Again, I think pressure from other stakeholders, other neighboring countries in Southeast Asia, as well as China, will also be a factor in this as well. But yeah, I do think the U.S. at the moment, to the extent President Trump wants to personally get involved, it does seem to have been influential in the past, and it could be influential again. And his tool is to threaten tariffs, and it worked before, so he might try that again. Is he going to dispatch special envoys like we see Witkoff trying to bring about a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia? That's another option that the U.S. has as well. But given that President Trump was personally involved previously, I would expect him to continue to be so.
Well, as you have mentioned, U.S. President Donald Trump said over the weekend that both countries agreed to peace, but fighting still continues. And as you have mentioned again, it is kind of disrespectful for him, in his opinion, with dozens of people displaced now. What are some of the immediate solutions needed to be implemented to allow humanitarian corridor for the local residents, for example?
Well, if the issue is to try and allow civilians to evacuate or to bring in medical aid, I mean, that could be achieved, and it's easier said than done, but that could be achieved even with something like a 1-hour humanitarian pause or a half-day humanitarian pause in fighting. So there are solutions for something like that if the two sides are willing to do so. But I think your question brings up a point that's really part of this discussion, which is, I don't think the two sides, even though I said there's going to be ill will going forward, I don't think either side wants a long-term situation where there's a large zone that civilians need to avoid, where people cannot return to their homes on a long-term basis because it becomes a military zone, whether that's on the Cambodian side or the Thai side. It's very bad for the images of these countries. They both rely on inbound investment as well as tourism to keep their economies growing. And I don't think either of them wants the image that the world, or the perception that the world has, is that these are countries at war. In ASEAN, we have the civil war in Myanmar, and it's a situation that now has been going on almost 5 years, began in 2021. And the world pays attention when it's not paying attention to wars in other places like Ukraine or Gaza. But I'm bringing this up because I don't think Thailand or Cambodia want the rest of the world to bunch them in with their neighbor Myanmar, which has a reputation for this kind of strife and fighting that's gone on literally for decades, despite the recent period when there was a short-term experiment with democracy before the war began in 2021. But again, I don't think they want the world to perceive them as being at war. So they do have incentives to try and find solutions to return to normalcy as quickly as possible.
Well, yes, the expectations are for the normalcy, but do you think that it is sustainable for the both parties to continue for the Thailand's part, for the Cambodia's part, to continue this fighting for longer terms? And how do you think that it can realistically continue for?
It's difficult to continue the fighting, more so for the Cambodian side than the Thai side. The Thailand military is quite large, and it is well trained, and also has an enormous amount of weapons and logistics, and they are prepared for a battle more so than the Cambodians are. Would other countries provide support if this were to continue? No, because again, I think other countries do have incentives to bring this to a close. So Cambodia often relies on China for military support, for weapons and training, joint exercises. And Thailand has a number of security partners, the United States being one, but China has also become a security partner for Thailand in recent years as well. But I don't think other countries really want to supply weapons to this particular fight. And there are other places in the world where, unfortunately, countries do take sides in wars between two countries or in civil wars. We see that in a number of places in the Middle East and in Africa. But again, I don't think the other stakeholders are trying to line up here and have a proxy war, for example, where Thailand and Cambodia are shooting at each other for an extended period of time. That really is not a policy goal for the United States or for China in this situation.
Well, when we consider United States and China and the other actors that are involving this situation, but mainly U.S. and China, U.S. more than China actually, what would you say that these actors who have been a great deal of potential for the region as well, trying to take the initiative into their own hands and actually acting on it? Do you perhaps expect President Trump to make a move anytime soon, or do you think that he's going to call out once or twice and just continue afterwards?
I would expect President Trump to continue to be involved, whether that's having more phone calls with the leaders or possibly inviting them to the White House. Although, again, I think he'd view that as somewhat disrespectful because there was supposed to be an agreement already. So it's an annoyance for President Trump that the agreement has now appeared to have collapsed. But I do think he will continue to be personally involved. And also keep in mind that internally within the Trump administration, whether that's Secretary of State Rubio or people at the Department of War, I think there are people on the foreign policy and national security team saying that the United States needs to be involved in this, not only because Thailand is historically close to the United States, but simply because the United States wants to be seen as influential in Southeast Asia. It certainly doesn't want to cede the role of the most influential country in the region to China. So for that reason alone, I think there's a lot of internal discussion, and that message gets brought to the president that the United States does have a role, and it should embrace that role. And again, we've seen President Trump doing that over the past few months, notwithstanding the fact that the agreement appears to have collapsed at the moment.
Well, Ross, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your analysis, and thank you so much for joining us here on A News. Always a pleasure having you here.
Thank you.
Well, with that, let's continue.